Welcome to the Under the Hat podcast,
the show where we talk about everything and anything that is top of mind in education.
The goal is to provide meaningful conversations to what is currently happening in our classrooms.
Stories, pains,
moments of success.
We want to hear it all.
Welcome, friends, to another episode of Under the Hat podcast. We're super excited to be here again with you all. And for those that are joining live, feel free to drop all that love in the chat. Sophie and I love catching up with you all. And then also a big shout out to all of you that are showing that love on social media, on our webpage. I see you all listening on the back end, right? Whether you're in your car, going to work, what have you, maybe in your classrooms. And so we're just super pumped to be here on the Saturday morning. You may have noticed that the hat now has a TikTok. And I've always been that person that was really scared of TikTok. But there was a few folks that have asked, like, hey, it'd be really cool to see some content and kind of get, highlights and stuff of that nature. So that's what I'm doing. And Sophie and I are working on that and expanding our reach there. But let's dive into things. We are joined. I'm super excited for this because if you're a teacher, you probably have seen Teacher Goals. And so Teacher Goals was, I remember when I was still in the classroom, like I would see like a tweet of sort. Back then it was a tweet. It was some sort of post of just like, yeah, now I'm about to go have a better day, based on like the inspiration, the story, the narrative of the post, whether it was a GIF or some sort of graphic. So I'm super excited to dive into this conversation. We are joined by the founder of Teacher Goals, Brad Weinstein. And Brad, it is so good to connect with you. I know we've connected like very small ounces in the past, but thanks for being here today.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. Glad to be here on a Saturday talking about education.
I really hope that our listeners are not in their classroom on their Saturday. I really hope that is not where they are. But they can listen to us later on like their lunch break or something. That's totally fine, but not on a Saturday. But yeah, Brad is, as Steve said, the founder of Teacher Goals in 2014 as a way to give educators inspiration and laughter as they do such important work in classrooms. He is the primary content creator for Teacher Goals and oversees the strategic vision of the organization. Brad, tell us a little bit more about your education journey.
Sure. So I began teaching in 2005. I student taught actually in first grade. And I realized very quickly that that was not for me. I don't know how lower elementary teachers do it, So I thought, how hard could it be to teach kids the most basic of skills, how to add, subtract, letters. I quickly found that is the absolute hardest thing to teach. So when I taught first grade, I was blowing, wiping noses, tying shoes, and I love the people that can do that. That just wasn't for me. In particular, as a 22-year-old male, just wasn't my thing at the time. I taught fourth grade after that, which was really cool for a couple of years. They, they were a lot more of my, age range, but they didn't quite get my sense of humor. So I have a very dry sense of humor, as you might see on Teacher Goals. I said a lot of things went over their heads. I was like, I'm going to keep on going until they think I'm funny. It didn't quite happen in fourth grade. Some of them got it, some of them didn't. But I then went to middle school for about a decade. And as I like to tell people, I talk to gray hair this side, gray hair this side. That is from my middle school years of being a teacher. So I like to say that every year at the middle school is like dog years of teaching. We should get 7 years credit for every year that we work with, 11, 12, 13-year-olds. They are going through a very interesting time in their life with their bodies changing. The teacher not being someone they want to impress. They want to impress their friends all of a sudden. And there's also a drop off in our priority of social emotional learning and teaching social skills at the middle school. So it's that age that need it the most, but it's the age where they kind of think they know better. They're grown, So the middle school is that weird range where you have to really like it. Very few people go into education thinking, I want to be a middle school science teacher. They either want to teach elementary kids because they're young and cute, or I want to teach high school because I really love chemistry or I really love physics or something in particular. After that, I became an administrator. So I went from a teacher to a high school principal. And, in my journey as a high school principal, I noticed a lot of disproportionality in discipline. I noticed a lot of punitive practices in school. So we started embarking upon our restorative practices journey, which led to the book I wrote with my co-author called Hacking School Discipline. And after that, being at the high school, I went on to become the founding director of curriculum and instruction at Purdue Polytechnic High School. So I've been in education for a while. I still love working with teachers and educators. It's just a matter of, you have to have lived it, been there to really know what you're talking about, to really know how teachers think, how educators think, and really connect and resonate with educators.
Yeah.
Good. So I really connect with you with being a middle school teacher. I was a middle school teacher for 6 years. And then I was a secondary coach, mainly at a middle school for 5.5 years after that. And middle school kids are so fun. And if you don't think that, then you don't need to be in middle school. Because they come in at like 6th grade and they're like little chubby babies with like the baby fat still on their cheeks and stuff. And then they leave and they're twice the size that they were when they came into the building. They've gone through an entire change between like the hormones in their bodies and growing and their social life, because usually they come in from feeder schools. Their lives are completely different. And they're really interesting, the things that they talk about. So I love being in the middle school. But yeah, it's definitely a different world than elementary and high school for sure.
Absolutely. When I work with schools and I walk into a bathroom and there's kindergartners with their pants down, and like there's people putting themselves in lockers, and there's kids doing all kinds of interesting things. I would take the middle school attitude over those things I see at the kindergarten level any day of the week. It's just a matter of, at the middle school, it's very strange as far as like you have to, again, connect with those kids. You have to really want to be there and just expect the unexpected. Know that it's going to be interesting. Know that the kids are going to be transitioning from like little elementary kids to thinking they're grown, but they're not quite grown. It's a very interesting time. But if you like that age, and they did get my humor at the middle school, FYI. When I went to they rolled their eyes.
That's important.
Yes, the high schoolers rolled their eyes at my dad jokes and my sense of humor. The middle school kids actually laughed, or at least appeased.
Yeah. And so you had mentioned that, like, there are certain things about the middle school age, those grade levels, you would take that over the elementary levels, and that's obviously like a preference, right?
Oh,
is there anything that you're like, ooh, I would definitely take middle school over high school for any particular reasons? I'm just curious if you have anything on that.
I like at the high school. Well, one of the biggest reasons why I like the middle school, I feel like by the time we get them as freshmen at the high school, that freshman year is so pivotal. Like that year, if they get suspended, that year if they have a GPA, that year if they are failing classes, that year can make or break you. That sets you up for success or that sets you up for failure. So freshman year is a critical year. But I feel like we're getting too many students at the high school level who, by the time you get them, it's almost too late in some cases to get them where they need to be in the time you have them. And again, we're going to drag them past that graduation line. But I felt like by the time we got them at the high school level, the gap was so big that it was really hard to remedy that freshman year. And you get them, back in the day, before there were so many options for schools, you had a system, right? Like all the kids went to the same middle school, they went to the same elementary school, and you got them, they came all the way up. So you had a lot more control over the whole entire educational journey. Nowadays, you have, the kids are coming from a lot of elementary schools. They're coming from a lot of different middle schools. It's not as common to stay in your whole town your whole life and to go and come up there. So I feel like at the high school level, we're not really getting the same feeder system where we know what they got before they came to us, if that makes sense. At the high school level, I liked it, and it was great. It's just that I felt like the middle school is that make or break time. So, in that 6th through 8th grade year, that's when you prepare them for the high school. You can't just, treat them like elementary kids, have elementary expectations, not catch the kids who can't read or can't do basic math, So I felt like the middle school kind of was a gap in that time. And that's where I wanted to work. I wanted to work in that time where when I sent them to the high school, they were on their way to success. So I felt like at the high school, I felt a little more helpless, whereas at school, I felt like I could better prepare them for high school. So it's just that I feel like it's that missing link. Like I feel like the push is on, we have to get them to read by 3rd grade. And at the high school is we have to get them to graduate. We forget that the middle school is that time that makes or breaks students headed into the high school. So that's for me where I felt like my work needed to be.
Yeah. And so I definitely feel that. So being, coming from the high school classroom, I recognize right away that like that freshman year, kind of like we were talking about, within one semester, they're already behind credits, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just one semester. And then even getting into the whole, freshman year, they're so behind that I kind of see that like, okay, so what's the solution there? And at least when, my area where I taught, it's just credit recovery programs that actually don't fill in those gaps, right? Like they're very asynchronous. It takes like one teacher to run a class of like, let's say 40 students, but the students, they're just doing, to my measure, busy work, right? It's just like a digital platform where they're just going through each module, checking some boxes to justify that, oh, they have the credit now, but it doesn't give you the touch of another human, of a teacher supporting them, not just academically, but also like social and emotionally, other things that are going on. So it's like they're not real solutions. And then you're right, it's too late. Like let's say they do that for 4 years and boom, they're gone. And it doesn't, I get why those kind of programs exist, and why it's built that way. But in the same time, I think it does a disservice to those students and those families.
Absolutely.
So kind of another topic that you mentioned in your talking earlier was the restorative practice, and what that looked like. And I would like to dive into that just a little bit, because when I talk with teachers, whether it's globally or locally, I think there's maybe like a misconception, like when they hear that term. Some of the feedback I get from teachers is like maybe the practice puts too much power in the hands of the disobedient student. And I know that's not true. But I'm just curious, like what your thoughts are on that topic, or maybe just like talking like what the restorative practice is, and kind of the work that you've done with it.
Yeah, I would say that the power struggle is one of the main causations of students that act out. They have a lack of power at home, a lack of power in their relationship, a lack of power in school. They just go to school. They're supposed to sit, do as you're told, regurgitate information on the test. So I feel like the students feel a lack of power and they try to get it back. They try to find a way. It's not always a healthy way. It's not always a productive way, but sometimes they need to have a say. So when it comes to restorative practices, I like to think, as I'm getting older in it, I was a lot more edutopian, or utopian, I should say, view of it, where, oh yes, we should allow students to do X, Y, or Z. There's no punitive, there's no suspensions. But the reality is that when we think about restorative practices, we got a little soft. I feel like we're either to one extreme of it, where we let kids run the building and we let a kid punch a kid in the face and come back to class with a candy bar. So I felt like we got to the point where we misunderstood the purpose of restorative practices, just like we misunderstand PBIS. PBIS is not trinkets and giving out rewards and class parties and apps that have currency. That's not what PBIS was intended to be, but that's what it became. Same thing with restorative practices. Like, we are intentionally coaching, teaching, and ensuring accountability for actions with restorative practices if done correctly. So it is not get out of jail free card. It is not, being super soft and letting students run your room. It is not no suspensions. It is, what can we do to have students stop the behavior and take accountability and build empathy for others? Because a lot of our students are desensitized to that with the pandemic, with technology, and a lot of other mediums, and parents not at home, students having to grow up too quickly now because of their home situation and having to watch their siblings and do things that, it's just the family dynamic has changed a lot since, I was a kid. A lot more kids are coming into schools with a lot more trauma than I've ever seen or ever experienced in my classmates when I was growing up. So think about restorative practices. It's not really always done with fidelity. And a lot of the times it's done in the office, but not in the classroom. It is, kid punches a kid in the face, now we just don't suspend them. It is not, how do we prevent the kid from hopefully learning the skills they needed to communicate with the friends that they were in conflict with in the first place. So it's a lot more reactive, and it's just an alternative to suspension versus a mindset. And it's something everyone in the building holds, not just the principal, not just the assistant principal, not just the dean.
Yeah. I've seen it even at the school that I taught at. And if anybody knows that school, like, no shade, right? Like, I'm just like my own, reflecting back to my own experiences, but like, where I've seen like restorative practice fail is just when people are just not on the same page.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so like, you would have something happen in a classroom, the kid leaves or the student leaves, and then how it's handled from one administrator, let's say, is not aligned to like the other adult or whoever else is involved. And then it's confusing for the kid, it's confusing for the teacher. We're like, okay, cool, how is this getting addressed? So I'm curious, like, where, like, with your skill set, and you published a book on it, like the implementation of it, like what should that look like, and do you have guidance on that?
Yeah, so the implementation of it, when we think about restorative practices, it's something that has to happen over time. It's not just something where we're a restorative school immediately. It is not something that can just be done. It's something where you have to first get people on board with the why behind it, the mindset, because you can ask the 5 questions that the International Institute of Restorative Practices has published that are widely used, but you can ask them in the wrong way. You can ask them with coercion. You can ask them in a way where students don't respond to them. And then what do I do now if the student didn't, when you asked, how were you feeling at the time, or why did you do that? Or, what impact do you have on others? All those questions, the student can still say, well, I said I didn't like their hair because their hair is terrible. And that's their answer. You know what I mean? Like, they haven't quite gotten the idea or have the empathetic lens. So there's a science to it, which is the questions, but then there's an art to it that has to be worked through. So when you think about implementation, like, you have to get everyone on board with the why behind it first, because if not, they're going through the motions. Just like adopting a curriculum, and everyone, okay, next year, everyone, we're going to do this type of curriculum. And everyone hates that curriculum because they had no voice in it. They don't understand the curriculum. They don't understand why the old curriculum was gotten rid of. They just know that the district said, we're adopting this program this year. So the teachers teach it because they have to, but they're going to go through the motions. They're going to just do what they're told, and they're not going to do it with enthusiasm as much as if they had a voice and a choice in it. So I always say, start with the why, start with the, actual practice, to start with the mindset, because when I say to teachers, because there's a lot of misconceptions with restorative practices. Again, they think it is the no accountability, students do what they want kind of system. And in some systems it is, because the administrators themselves they went to a conference session on it, right? And then they're going to go do it at their school. Like, it's a lot bigger and deeper than that. It's not something you can learn in an hour kind of thing, right? Especially not how to bring it to your school. You can't bring a system to your school that you are not well versed in. You can bring the idea to your school, but we can't just come back from a conference and we're a restorative school because, we're doing this now. You have to spend at least a year just even talking about it, meeting about it, reading about it, talking about how this might look. And that's where I think we fall off. We just all of a sudden come, and that's not just restorative practice. That's with any system. That's with any initiative. You have to talk about it. You have to work through the people that think it's terrible. You have to have these discussions with people. You have to get the buy-in before you do any of the actual practices.
Yeah, it's like, especially something like restorative practice, that's not a one-off professional development like that you're doing after a conference. Be like, hey, here's this thing, go, right? So I would imagine like there also has to be a plan, like, like full-on implementation over the course of a semester, school year, right? And I would imagine like it is really important to have that teacher voice of not just at the beginning, but how it's going, what's working, what's not, and how it could be customized. And I would imagine that like restorative practice is something that could be customized to an extent. I don't know if you would agree with that.
It can be in a way, because, like, for example, some schools might have a dean and that's the entire extent of their discipline team. Some schools might have a dean, behavior specialist. Some schools might have a dean, behavior specialist, and social workers. So you have to build your system and your ecosystem based on the staffing that you have. There's the ideal, then there's the less than ideal, then there's the how are we going to do this because we have no staff model, right? So that's why I like to say it has to live and start in the classroom. Like, we have to start there, because if not, we're going to be a reactive system. So when you're thinking about this system starting in the classroom, right? As a teacher, you can have a restorative mindset and do restorative things. And that's, I think, the differentiator between hacking school discipline and what has existed before it. It wasn't really something that was done or thought about in the classrooms as much, I think. So the book didn't invent restorative practices. The book made it so I could do it more in my classroom. So thinking about that as a teacher, how do I build an environment where students feel like they belong and want to be there, and they know each other and about each other and have empathy for each other? If you start foundationally with empathy, foundationally with the students actually feel like they matter in that room, because I will tell you that students will be a lot less likely to break something that they feel like they have skin in. And a lot of our students that are acting out don't have skin in the game. Like, they don't care if class goes awry, because no one in that class cares about me. I'm just here, I'm going to zone out. I'm not going to do anything. I don't know. I've seen at the high school level, which shocked me, kids don't even know each other's names halfway through the year. Some of the kids don't know their teachers' names. I asked them, okay, who's your English teacher? I don't know. And they're being serious, and this happens at the secondary level a lot more so than the elementary level. A big part of my job is convincing secondary teachers to teach more like elementary.
Yeah.
Like that's a big part of my job. Like, I'm not doing anything crazy. I'm like, we have our morning meeting, we have our community meetings, and things like that. But I'm convincing them to do that at the high school level and the middle school level. And we kind of forgot that, because we went into education as elementary teachers with a whole child thought, right? Like a whole child approach. And at the high school level, a lot of it is how to teach chemistry well. It's not about how to teach the whole child, because they should know better by the high school. I'm going to prepare them for college. So I'm going to start with chemistry, not with kids. And this isn't everybody, but typically the secondary mindset towards teaching can be a little bit different than the elementary. Like, you're teaching kids first. You're teaching content, but you have to teach the kid before you can get the content going, because it's just futile without it.
That's such a powerful mindset. Like, because at the high school level, at least my experience, like it did feel like, oh, each class period, bust them in, bust them out. Like, get in, do the 50 minutes, boom, right? And before you know it, the day's done. And you're like, okay, cool, that's done. And now I have to do the next day, the next lesson, the next unit. Which I also feel is part of like just allotted time, like bandwidth. Like, I feel that maybe the system at large doesn't give us enough time to reflect on that. But there's also a conscious decision, right? Like that messaging, Brad, like if you were my principal and a few years ago, if you would have said that to me, I'd be like, huh, yeah, we don't do that well. In terms of taking practices that we know that are sound in those elementary levels, especially early elementary, and apply them to the whole learner, regardless of how tall they are, right? Yeah, that's super good. I never thought about that before.
Yeah, and when we think about it, like when I was teaching at the middle school, when I was teaching at the elementary, middle school level, at the middle school level where I was at, I didn't see quite as much of that going on. And that's where I started to do some of those things, which became the foundations for what I wrote about in high school discipline. I was doing those things at the middle school level because I was like, well, why are we not talking about social skills? Why am I teaching these kids biology, but I'm not teaching them about their own brain, and how their own brain works and how their own brain impacts others. So I started to like have these ideas at the middle school level. Well, why are we not doing a curriculum? Why are we not, during advisory or homeroom doing lessons still? Those kinds of things. So when I first went to the high school, what I noticed was the first day I was new principal, I saw kids coming in for registration, running up to their teachers and hugging them. And I was like, what is going on? Like, why are high school kids, 17 years old, 18 years old, 16 years old, they saw their teacher, they ran up to them and they hugged them. And I was like, what is going on? Because where I came from, that was not normal at the middle school level, let alone the high school level. And granted, I went from a very affluent school district to a school which was, high poverty, 90, 95% or something like that, right? Mm. So what I realized right then and there was these teachers are more than teachers to these students. These teachers they're adult, in some cases, they're one person, they're adult role model, that one person that supports them, and again, they're not their saviors, which is a whole other soapbox I could get on for a while. They're not saving kids, but they are that connection that they maybe don't have elsewhere, or there's someone that adds to that. Because a lot of the students we had were first gen. They didn't have a parent, a grandma, a cousin, a rich uncle who has connections at some company where they can, slide into that job. They didn't have that one person who's already been through college in a lot of cases, right? So they were not just teachers, they were mentors. They were people that really meant a lot to these kids. And you wouldn't think it, but the high school kids are still kids in bigger bodies.
Yes. And they are. And the way that they love stickers just proves it. Mm-hmm. You mentioned something about how like we're being reactive instead of proactive. And it reminded me of my very first school that I ever worked at. Very similar to your high school. Like 100% were on free lunch. Like 100% of the kids were on free lunch. And at the beginning of the school year, we didn't start with curriculum at the middle school. We started with basic functioning in this environment rules. You walk on the right side of the hallway. This is how you open your locker. This is how we cross the hallway because we were like an H. This is how you cross the path of traffic. This is how you wash your hands. This is how you access the boys' bathroom. And because I was right outside the boys' bathroom. And wait in line, and this is what you do if there's no toilet paper in there in the middle of the day. We literally went over all of these basic rules that I was like, they should already know that. especially if they were already at that school at 6th grade and I was teaching 7th grade. And I was like, what? But I learned so much that first year, as all teachers do, that they don't all know that. They didn't all come to this school last year now we're coming to the 7th grade. They didn't all understand the expectations, and maybe they forgot over the summer because they don't have those expectations at home. So they're readjusting to this new environment. So we were very proactive at that school and teaching all of the expectations. And if we were going to do West Virginia Moves, I'm from West Virginia, and so West Virginia Moves was a big deal. And we were going to have kids moving around in the classroom. We didn't just say, okay, here's the game, go. We had to teach everything and explain expectations before we allowed them to even have the pushy balls or whatever the activity was that we were going to do. And then I went to a different school, and they were doing a similar type of thing, but without everyone on board with the teach your expectations before you expect them to follow them. Mm-hmm. And it was interesting. Like, the whole vibe was completely different. Some teachers felt like the principal was taking the student's side rather than backing them up the way that a good principal hopefully would do. And it was a completely different vibe, because the first school, everyone was like, okay, we're going to teach you. We're going to be there for you. We're going to feed you everything that we can. We're going to love you because we don't know what you're going home to, type of thing. And then at this other school, they were like, you should respect me because I am an adult. And the principal didn't handle this, because we had a new principal who was doing this it didn't go well at all. So do you have any pointers for, like, you already sort of mentioned it, like it's not going to happen like overnight sort of thing, but are there any other like tips and pointers for doing shifting?
Mm-hmm. So first of all, I start usually with the data. Like, what is the data telling us at our school, right? Because no one wants unwanted behaviors. I mean, I've never ran into a teacher or an administrator that was like, we want this. So we start with that, we start with that. So the data says that this is our biggest behavioral problem. And then we unpack that, just like you unpack a standard if you're thinking about, designing curriculum or backwards mapping, something like that. So what is the backwards mapping of the behaviors you're seeing at your school that you don't want, right? So we start to think about the data. We start to think about that. We start to think about disproportionality in your data. Why are certain students, certain ethnicities, certain genders, certain identities, getting a lot more discipline issues than others? Why is that? So when we start thinking about things from a different lens, we look at the data first, we look at the unwanted behaviors first, then we start coming up with solutions. Because I can tell you that, if you just come into a school and say you all are doing everything wrong, and here's the magic way to fix it, it's never going to work, right? It is always unpacking things with people, because very few people come into that PD, come into that school with I want to change my practices. It is always changing the students, right? I want the students to do this. I want the students to do that. I want my administrator to do this. I want my administrator to do that. So there's a big thing with looking from within. What am I doing? What can I do versus, changing the students. So it's all about unpacking for me. I usually start with the data. I start with the mindsets. So I do an analysis with schools that I work with. It's just like, what are even the beliefs towards disciplines that we have? And I find that we vary drastically with even the beliefs that we have about discipline, what it should look like, what it should feel like. And I always ask in my professional development, can everyone in your building name or answer these 3 questions? It is, how do I prevent discipline from happening in the first place? Or, when discipline occurs, what do I do? And what do I do after a behavior has occurred? And I will bet you, if you have 50 teachers, you will not find any 2 teachers that have the same idea about those 3 questions. Not even 2 that will answer those same 3 questions in the same way. So when I talk to teachers about that, when I talk to administrators about that, those 3 questions, then we get down to the root of consistency. At the middle school level, at the high school level, The reason why we have these behaviors is because we are inconsistent from room to room with what we expect. Cell phone, for example. I can have a cell phone, and in one class, I can have my cell phone. I can be texting and making a TikTok on my cell phone, and the teacher is like, well, it's your education. Oh, well, right? And in another
Mhm.
class, I can have my phone on my desk as long as, and I can use it as long as I'm not texting. I can listen to music on it or whatever, right? And in another class, if the teacher even thinks you have a cell phone, they're taking it. And it becomes very inconsistent. I say, okay, teachers, administrators, could you work in 4 different buildings in 4 different class periods with 4 different expectations? And every principal you work for has different ways to grade, different ways, different expectations, different dress code, and then go, right? So in high school, we go run a mile of PE, we go learn about the Civil War, we go learn about the parts of a cell, and then we go learn about, how to play an instrument in 4 hours, which is wild. No workplace works like that, right? That's not how it works, right? So we expect them to change gears that quickly. And middle school, I was 47-minute blocks. So for 47 minutes, your science brain is on. For 47 minutes, you're running a mile. For 47 minutes, you're jumping to this. And not only did the subject change, but the expectations. One teacher allows you to have your hood on, one teacher does not. One teacher does not allow it, but only tells the kids that look a certain way to take it off and not the other kids. And that's just with hoodies and phones. Imagine all of the other expectations. So the biggest way school discipline falls apart is inconsistency from room to room. And then we build towards that. So what is our school's shared vision that we can all buy into and agree to? Because I will tell you, cell phones would not be an issue if for 2 weeks every staff member enforced something, and we all did it. Just like
The same way.
the same
The
way.
same way. Yeah.
The same way. If a kid knew that if they had their cell phone out, it was coming to the desk, and every time they did it, it was coming to their desk, and every class they did it, it was coming to the desk, we would break that within 2 weeks, if not sooner. That's where it falls apart, is that it becomes the principal's rule. It is, well, hey, you can't wear your hood because the principal says so, versus we cannot wear our hoods because as a school, that is a safety issue. And, like the kids need to know the why behind the expectation, right? But it is not, because like when I was a principal, I saw kids go through 3 class periods with their hood on. 3. And then I saw them in the hallway and I told them to take it off. It did not go well. Their very first thing was, will so-and-so let me do it? Will so-and-so let me do this? And then it became my rule. So I would see the kids starting to take their hoods off when I walked by, but they would not take them off elsewhere, right? So then it became compliance of just me alone trying to enforce an expectation. So in other words, when the teachers buy into the expectations and we co-develop them with our staff, and it is our expectations, not the principal comes in and says, here are our rules, and the staff has to follow them, right? So that's when I get into, that's why that first year is development. It is co-developing these things. It is through the lens of restorative practices, through the lens of trauma-informed practices, through the lens of applied neuroscience. It is through those lenses, but you got to get your teachers on board. If not, they're just going to do things out of compliance because the principal said so, but not believing it themselves, or they're not going to do it at all because, no one's ever said, I don't do that. No one ever says anything to me about it.
I really appreciate the understanding the why behind it. As a person that is neurodiverse, understanding the why of the rule to know that it is justified, that it is a fair rule, that it is a needed rule, and it makes sense, helps me follow it. And I'm a rule follower, like I'm a rule follower, but there are some rules, Steve, there are some rules that I have come across in my life where I'm like, this makes no sense. And I don't. And because I don't understand the why behind it, the history about why it was made and all this jazz, like I don't get it. It just seems like a silly rule to me. I'm not gonna follow it. Like,
Yeah.
And that's just me. But yeah, really letting the kids understand why, that it is for their safety, that it is for the protection of others and not just you type of thing. And it is it could be a really powerful message for them to get it. Yeah. I love that.
This is so good. And Brad, if you're willing, like we have to have you back on because we're we haven't really talked about teacher goals yet. But I've learned just so much. So Brad, like I went to Cami straight from the classroom, right? So I have little context of what it's like to be a principal. Like no context. I appreciate everything that principals do. Like, it's amazing work. But like just learning just about you and your approach and your knowledge of restorative practice, I'm like, wow, this is something that's not getting discussed enough. And by all means, you're more than welcome to come back and continue this conversation. Though I do want to spend a little bit of time specifically talking about teacher goals, in terms of what is teacher goals, like what is, like, I guess, like the mission statement. I know that like it is centered around authors. That's been my, like, from my vantage point, what I've seen. So if you can just speak a little bit about, teacher goals and the work that you're doing with it.
Absolutely. So when I started, teacher goals in 2014, at the time, what was popular, like I've always been into Twitter when it was Twitter, not as much anymore. But when it was Twitter, I was on there quite a bit, connecting with a PLN. Like when I had my teachers that I worked with, that was great. But when I had a professional learning network of people that were from everywhere, I realized the connectedness of the whole world. And I realized that a lot of these issues in education were universal. It wasn't just in my school, this is going on. I realized that there were people that were experts in this, that I was like, oh, wow, I can learn from this person about this. You didn't have to have all of the institutional knowledge in the building that you were at anymore. So I found that very fascinating and connected with people all over the place. So at the time, I have a sense of humor that's very dry. Like you don't know if I'm joking or not. I keep a straight face when I say something. I will go to a restaurant, for example, and they'll ask me if I want to sit at the bar, and I'll say, I can't, I'm only 20. Now, I'm 42. I'm 42. I have some gray hair on both sides. Like I'll just get a dead look in the face, and they'll look bewildered, and then they won't say anything to me. I'll just do random things like that all the time. My students will ask me, for example, when I taught, hey, do you know my sister such and such? And I go, oh, did she look like this? Did she have hair like this? Did she do? I'll describe like 10 things about her sister, and then she'll go, yeah, that's her. I go, don't know her. Don't know. I've never heard of your sister. When I very clearly have just named 10 things about her sister that only could be her sister. And then those look at me like, confused. I'll eventually, come back to it. But like I have a very dry sense of humor with people. And I realize that if you don't have fun teaching, if you don't have fun in staff meetings, if you don't have fun sometimes, you have to laugh instead of cry sometimes. Because if you only focus on the negative, if you only focus on the crushing pressure of the job, if you can't laugh at the end of the day when everything went wrong, but I'm still standing, we're still here, I still have my team, we made it today. If you can't look at it, in a week from now, it's not funny that day, but it is kind of hilarious how a student took off their shoe and threw it across the room. Like in retrospect, you have a story now. You can always tell about the one time you did this and a student thought it was a good idea to take off their shoe and throw it across the room instead of getting out of their chair. It's not funny at the time, but the reality is that our job is entertaining in a lot of ways. When you're sitting in your office at your cubicle, as an accountant, you're not going to have a student ask you, as Simon Holland has said, what is your third most favorite reptile? Right? You're not going to get that anywhere else. You're not going to bring back a kindergartner. I was at a school. I brought back a kindergartner that had eloped. I brought him back to the classroom, and I got him back in there. As I'm bringing this kid back that had eloped, another kindergartner just randomly, doesn't even know me, randomly runs up and gives me a huge hug. You're not going to get that, in any other job. So when I thought about that, I was like, at the time I saw that Taylor Swift, for example, was on a meme about, on her boat with, I think, Selena Gomez and some other celebrities that she was friends with. and there was a hashtag called friendship goals. And I've seen, you know, a picture of people like holding hands, like the girl's hand is behind her back with the boyfriend's hand like this. And there's a picture of them walking towards the beach. And it says like relationship goals. Yeah. So like that was becoming popular. I was like, well, what about if a teacher does something awesome in the classroom? Like, what if they finally get that one kid to read? What if they finally get that one kid to talk for the first time? They have not raised their hand even once, right? What if I finally get my kid to master a standard, right? And I thought, teacher goals. And then I got on Twitter and I saw that no one had taken it. I'm like, wait a minute, no one has ever, it's not crossed anyone's mind ever that this is a good handle to use. So I thought, okay, I'm going to take it, you know, I'm going to secure it and not do anything with it. I just thought it was, you know, I just sat on it for a little bit. Then, you know, a couple of years later, like teacher goals went from 0 followers to 10,000 in a couple of years. And I thought I had made it, right? I thought, oh my gosh, like people are really resonating with it. So I started posting some funnier stuff. And then I put a tagline, what's funny, frustrating, and fantastic about education. I like my alliteration, right? And then I posted some funny stuff. And then I posted some inspirational stuff. Then I posted some real talk stuff, right? And it just resonated with people because I was actually living it that day. Here's what I thought about that day. You know, I went to the copier machine and I noticed that every tray was out. Like every single tray was out. There were crumbled up papers on the floor. There was ink spilled. Like this copier could not look any more of a mess if we tried. And someone had just left it there. They gave up. Like it wasn't even like a repair guy there, repair woman there. It wasn't even like they were in there actively fixing. They just dismantled the copier, gave up. I'm hoping they called the office, but I took a picture of it.
Might not have.
Yeah, I don't know what happened. I took a picture of it. And that picture of it, you know, and it was at Zionsville West Middle School in Indiana. I took a picture of it and then I captioned it, you know, I posted online and I said, fixing this should be on the teacher license exam. That's all I said, you know, fixing this should be on the teacher license exam. And, you know, at the time I had recently started a Facebook account because I was like, you know what, people seem to like this. I'm going to also do teacher goals on Facebook and, you know, a few other Instagram, a few other platforms. And I posted it to Facebook. And at the time I had 6,000 followers. I went from 6,000 followers to 20,000 followers with that all of a sudden within a month, because that post went super viral. And when I say super viral, I'm talking about educational super viral, not Harry Styles super viral. You know what I mean? So for an educator, I was like, wow, this post got a lot of traction. That one copier still surfaces. I've seen other organizations use that same picture. Like that picture still lives on to this day. And I like to say it's the most famous educational copier of all time. You're going to see it. Like if you see it, almost everyone I know has seen this copier.
I think I have seen it. Like as you were describing it, I'm like, oh, I've seen that one. Like, I think I've reshared that one before, like at some point.
Yeah, and no one knew it was me, like, because at the time I just posted a picture of that and then I posted the caption, but I didn't at the time like make memes, right? I didn't like, you know, actually get on Canva. Canva didn't exist back then, right? I didn't like have any designer skills, so I would just post pictures and captions. So there's a lot of like earlier pictures from teacher goals that are still circulated today, and every day I see something that I made back when I was only on Twitter that people screenshotted, you know, did a screenshot of and post. So a lot of my early content doesn't have any branding on it or anything like that. But what I found out was that a lot of people could resonate with things that are about, you know, we could really get upset and mad about that copier and let it ruin our day, or we could post it online and everyone else who has problems with copiers could also find humor in their day. So I started posting stuff and we started to gain some traction on the platforms that we were in. Eventually, over time, you know, I was just posting stuff. I had no business or anything like that. I just enjoyed posting stuff and, you know, connecting with people. So after a certain amount of time, I realized that, you know, I wrote my first book, Hacking School Discipline. And I thought, okay, you know, I could I could publish books too. Like, why am I not publishing books? Because, you know, I publicized the book through my audience, and the book did pretty well. And I was like, could I publish other people's works and have them, you know, get the benefit of having the audience behind them as well? So it took a while to actually get there, but we did start publishing books, and I think we're 20, 30 books in at this point with our publishing, and it's doing pretty well. I just wanted to get the word out about best practices to the world and give authors the opportunity to use our platforms. So it's just fun. I only take on books that have, you know, I don't take on fluffy books that are about, you know, I don't know. I don't take on fluff. I take on a merging of the science and the art of teaching. I take on books that actually are applicable right away. I take on books that are going to help teachers do better at their craft. You know, so when we look at our books, they're not too dry and written by, you know, a professor that has not ever taught in their entire life and researches only. If I'm looking at a professor, which we have, which is awesome, they're actually working with kids right now. They are working with schools right now. They are in it. You know, so if somebody just simply has never taught, has never been in a school, is not working with kids, and just wants to write about research, that's not what we're interested in. We're interested in practitioners, people that actually do the work, have done the work with schools right now. So I think that's why our books resonate with people, because it's how to do things. And here's why to do those things, not just, you know, pie in the sky ideas about things that are theoretical.
Yeah, I've noticed that because I'm friends with a couple of authors that, you know, teach your goals. Dan Jones comes to mind, right? Where his book, his work, his books, plural, he has more than one. There's depth, right? Like there is examples there, like his own story, his own classroom lives in that book, in his books. And so, yeah, like I have noticed folks like that, right? That you all have supported and getting their messaging out. And, you know, Dan's in the classroom, right? Like he's not someone that's not relevant or no longer relevant. Like he's using everything that anyone reads in that book is, you know, that Dan's doing like right now, whether he's exhausted or not, right? Like, because he just did a post on that, like I think yesterday. So no, I think that's great. I think that's amazing, and I look forward to like seeing how that grows. I'm assuming you're gonna be taking more. Obviously, the right fit, and you know, I think that's just this idea of giving those teachers, those educators that need a voice, that want a voice, to have that microphone to be able to share the things that they're doing. I think it's great.
Absolutely. And with our authors, you know, we look at people that just really love what they do. They're passionate about it. They're experts in it. They're not writing a book to write a book. Like they literally are a guru in PBL, or project-based learning. They're a guru in applied neuroscience. You know, they actually, you know, live that content that they are putting out there for others. And I think that that's very, very important, because the reality is that when I wrote, you know, when I started working on hacking school discipline, I don't know nearly as much as I do now about discipline. You know, it's just one of those things where is that person continually growing in their craft and getting better at it, and you know, using and sharing that knowledge with others, because teaching is really hard, and it's, in my opinion, the hardest thing to do. I don't care what you do, where you work, pound for pound, minute for minute, put anybody in front of 30 13-year-olds and tell them to teach them math and get them, you know, in the workplace, you know, like, you know, if you're working as an accountant, you have one client at a time. The job is very hard. Like I couldn't do it, But I bet you very few people could go in front of 30 people and half of them don't want to be there. You can't fire anybody, right? You can't, like, the students like will have to learn that math. So you have unwanted, you're teaching something people don't like to people who don't want to learn it in a lot of cases. And you're dealing with not just the students, but their parents. We're dealing with behavioral issues. We're dealing with trauma. We're dealing with all sorts of other issues beyond the content, right? And we're held to all these expectations with minimal support, minimal training, minimal this. We're buying our own supplies. So, I want to give teachers the resources they need to be successful, because the reality is that it is one of the most complicated, if not the most complicated thing to do and to be good at. Anyone can teach. Anyone can teach. Few can be good at it, because it is insanely hard to be good at it. Like, I can put anybody in front of the room of 30 people. I can put very few people in front of those 30 people and get great results.
Yes to all that. Like the being good at it. Brad, thank you so much. We are almost out of time. Appreciate everybody that is tuning in or watching in the future. But Brad, like, as you may know, we do wrap up the show with the one for sure question that we ask on the show for you to answer is, what is under the hat for you right now? Like, and maybe you touched on it already, but just curious, from your vantage point, from your context, like, what is something that we should be talking about right now? The good, bad, or the ugly? What's top of mind?
What has been top of mind? Like, we've had some great books come out recently. We have Educate and Rejuvenate that just came out. And that book right there, like, self-care and taking care of ourselves. Like, I have learned that we can be toxically positive and just, and I hate toxic positivity where we're not listening to the real concerns and problems of the teachers. The reality is that we're not changing the system. We're going to function in the system we're in, and you have to take care of yourself. So I'm thinking about, that message is, you can't change where you work always. You can't change how other people act, but you can change how you handle it. I want bigger systemic change, but for now, we have to take care of ourselves in the best way we can as educators. We have Brain and Body. We have Body and Brain Brilliance by Dr. Lori Desautel, which is about the applied neuroscience of discipline, which is huge for me. We have a book that just came out called Unlocking SEL, which makes SEL actually manageable and doable, and how do you actually do SEL, and looking at the systems of that. We have other upcoming huge ideas in education as well. But for me, top of mind personally, I went out and did consulting for discipline, 4 years or so after the book came out, 5 years, still doing it today. What I found out was that every school is different. Every district is different. I couldn't just take the book and say, go and do it. What I found out was that, as we mentioned, I found out that implementing these practices is really hard. So for me, what I also found out was that the idea of restorative practices vary drastically. So for now, I'm thinking of my own next project, and my own next project for a book. I'm thinking about balanced discipline. I'm thinking about, how do we take the idea I talked about with that permissive, we're letting kids run the room, and we're taking the idea of authoritarian, where we could hear a pin drop and kids hate that room because they're being lectured to for 90 minutes in a row, and they literally would rather scratch their eyes out than be in that classroom. But everyone's quiet, right? What is the merger, and how do we find that we love kids, but we hold them accountable? So basically, thinking about that, how do we actually get kids to change their behavior? And getting them to change their behavior is in that accountability piece. It is in the, I do something, who was impacted, how do I go fix it? But, the intrinsic change in discipline, and giving teachers the practical know-how and strategies to do so that they are less frustrated in their classrooms. So basically everything I've learned working with many schools since the first book came out, I finally feel like I have gotten to the point where I'm starting to understand where to start. And that's why it doesn't go well in schools, because I did that for 4 years. Teachers don't have the luxury of focusing 4 years of time on one thing. If they focus 4 years of time on just discipline, they didn't have to do any other part of their job. Imagine how good you could be at that. Like, I had the luxury of spending 4 years figuring out what worked and didn't work with discipline in schools. So for me, my goal is to put all of that knowledge and know-how into my next project.
My brain is full, Brad. Thanks to you. Like there's so much that was discussed and unpacked. Again, if you're keen, we are so up, Sophie, right? To have you back. And so I just appreciate you coming on, Brad. And hopefully, we stay connected. I do want for everybody that's watching, listening, what have you, just to give the show a shout. And so we are at underhatpod.com. The website, it has all the things that you need, like whether it's to catch you over to Spotify, move you over to our Instagram account, TikTok now. And so you can go ahead and grab those links. All the episodes are there. My episodes are episodes. Sorry, I'm just so used to having this show, doing it solo, and I really appreciate that I get to do it with my best friend Sophie. But we're dropping episodes every weekend, and this one will get dropped at some point today. You can also give us a follow on the X, Under the Hat Pod. So feel free to drop that love there, subscribe, review, give us a review, only terrible things, please. And so go ahead and do all that for us. And so really quick before we do hop off, we are not running an episode next weekend. I am at a conference at Fall Q, so all of my West Coast friends, I know a lot of my friends will be out there with me at Fall Q. The following weekend,
I'm going to an amusement park, so we're not here. So you're
Sophie,
not gonna have an episode without Steve.
I thought you were working. Oh no, you're not working.
No, I'm not.
Aren't
working.
you? You're just gallivanting, right?
I'm gonna go gallivanting, as we say to each other.
Yeah. So we're taking next weekend off. And Brad, you might these two might be familiar to you. We are having. Let me hold on. Do a quick change up here for those that are watching. Episode 31 dropping, so like in more like 2 weeks, right? So we're looking at October 12th, episode 31, preparing the future with media literacy. And so Stephen Checker and Daniel Pereira. I recently connected with these two. Super excited for the conversation and what they're going to bring to the table. And so just look forward to that, folks. And so feel free to join us Saturday, 11 a.m. Pacific, 2 Eastern. So like just slightly different time. But it's going to be 4 of us. We have a party when it's 3 plus, but super excited for this. And so, tune in there or catch it afterwards. But yeah, friends, we're going to call it a do. We are here for it. Enjoy the rest of your Saturday, and be sure to keep your hats on, but your minds open. Until next time. Bye-bye, folks.
Thanks, everyone.